to you by Leadership Tennessee. Good evening, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for tonight's Leadership Tennessee Gubernatorial Forum at Lipscomb University. I'm Bob Mueller, honored to be your moderator for tonight's event. We will address the rules and introduce the candidates in just a moment, but first, a quick word from our host, Leadership Tennessee.
Tennessee's future is shaped and defined by its problem solvers. Those with a volunteer spirit coming together to find solutions. In its 5th year, Leadership Tennessee taps into that spirit and distills it, bringing impartiality, collaboration, and passion to strengthening Tennessee's communities. Each year, a network of leaders from East, Middle, and West Tennessee, rural and urban, gathers to share their collective experience and knowledge to address the state's most pressing issues. Leadership Tennessee's vision is for Tennessee to be known nationally as a state where leaders and engaged citizens are connected, well-informed, and committed to solving problems through nonpartisan, strategic dialogue and a balanced, pragmatic approach. Leadership Tennessee, leaders working together for a stronger Tennessee.
In addition to Leadership Tennessee, we would like to thank our other forum partners, the College of Leadership and Public Service at Lipscomb University, the USA Today Network Tennessee, WKRN and Nexstar Media Group, the Vanderbilt University Poll, the Howard H. Baker Jr. Center for Public Policy at the University of Tennessee, and the University of Memphis. Also, our producer, Stones River Group, and our technical producer, Logicon. 3 Tennessee Leadership Tennessee members will serve as panelists for tonight's forum. They are from Memphis, Daryl Cobbins, President and CEO of Universal Commercial Real Estate and a member of Leadership Tennessee Class 2. From Nashville, Michael Anastasi, Vice President of News for USA Today Network Tennessee and a member of Leadership Tennessee Class 4. And from Kingsport, Laura Wood, Senior Counsel for Eastman and a member of the Leadership Tennessee Class 5. Now, all the candidates have agreed to abide by a specific set of rules for tonight's forum. There will be no opening or closing statements. Candidates will not answer every question, but will be given an opportunity to answer an equal number of questions. Candidates will be allowed 45 seconds to respond to questions. Candidates are not allowed to reference or otherwise address one another. In the event that one candidate is referenced by another, the referenced candidate will be granted an additional 30 seconds to speak. The audience should refrain from applauding, cheering, or in any other way participating in today's forum, except for right now, as we once again welcome our candidates to tonight's forum. State House Representative Minority Leader Craig Fitzhugh. Former State of Tennessee Economic and Community Development Commissioner Randy Boyd. Former Mayor of Nashville Carl Dean. Businessman Bill Lee. And Speaker of the State House of Representatives Beth Harwell. Thank you, candidates, all for taking part tonight. Let's open the forum. I'm going to ask each of you, what would be your top 3 priorities as governor? After everyone has answered, we're going to share what Tennesseans think their top priorities would be, according to the statewide exclusive Vanderbilt poll. Your top 3 priorities, we begin with Mr. Fitzhugh.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you for having us here tonight, Lipscomb and Leadership Tennessee and all the sponsors. I'm certainly glad to be here. My top 3, there are many issues, and we all can't agree on all of them, whether we're Republican, Democrats, Independents. But I think if we concentrate on those 3 issues that it seems to me to be the most important in our state and do better with those issues, we can lift everyone up. And those issues are, most importantly right now, health care for Tennesseans. Secondly, most importantly overall, education for Tennesseans. And third, jobs and economic opportunity for Tennesseans. Those would be my three.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzhugh. Ms. Harwell.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm so honored to be back on Lipscomb's campus. This is where I graduated from, so I'm honored to be here again this evening. I will tell you, most important to me is education. As a member of the State House, you get to serve on 2 subject committees every year. And one of those committees I rotated every year. So I've served on everything from finance to transportation to commerce, because I wanted to learn as much as I could about state government. But there is one committee I never rotated off of, and that's education. Because I knew in my heart and in my mind, if we were going to move our state forward, it's going to be because we improved our education system. So paramount to me is education. And I will say, secondly, I am very proud of the fact that we balance our budget every year. So we will keep our fiscal house in order under my leadership as governor. Thank you.
Mr. D.
Number one, let me thank Lipscomb and thank Leadership Tennessee. Lipscomb's a great institution, and I love being here on campus. Education would be my top issue. I think education is the thing that will move our state forward the most. It is the thing that will create better jobs. It will allow us to have better health. I actually think it will make us a safer state to live in. But most importantly, it is the thing that will give our kids and our grandkids a chance to live their dreams and to be all that they can be. So education is tops with me. I think healthcare, actually responding to the failure to do the Medicaid expansion, is critical. We need to make health insurance available to more people. And then jobs. There are parts of the state that are hurting, and we can have no forgotten people in Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Mr. Lee.
Thank you so much. I am Bill Lee. I'm a cattle farmer. I'm a businessman who employs 1,200 folks, an outsider who's never run for office or worked for government, but a man who, because of a great tragedy in my life that God used in a real powerful way in my life, a man who knows that the highest call for me is to serve. And that's why I'm running. And Maria and I, to start this campaign, went to 95 counties in 95 days. And everywhere we went, people from all across this state want 3 things. They want a good job, they want a good school for their kid, and they want a safe neighborhood. And as governor, those would be the 3 priorities that I would focus on most.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Mr. Boyd.
I'd like to start by saying thank you to Lipscomb, and also a great shout out to Leadership Tennessee for the great program that they put together. Mayor Dean and I were in the first class. 5 of our 6 gubernatorial candidates were in Leadership Tennessee. So I want to say thank you to Leadership Tennessee. Thank you, Kathy Kate, for the great leadership job that you've done in developing all these leaders. For me, I started off running for governor to accomplish 3 things. These were 3 things that I helped develop while I was commissioner and while I was special advisor on higher education. So I knew my goals before I even knew that I wanted to run for governor. We want to make Tennessee the state of opportunity. Opportunity for better education, opportunity for better jobs, and opportunity for everyone. Opportunity for better education means completing the drive to 55. If we can do that, Tennesseans will make $9 billion more a year in extra income. We also want to make sure this is the best state in the Southeast for high quality jobs. We want to make sure we're not leaving our rural communities behind.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd. You heard the candidates' answers. According to the Vanderbilt poll, 25% of Tennesseans think education should be the top priority for state government. 21% think jobs and the economy should be the top priority. 20% think health care should be the top priority. Among those Tennesseans who self-identified as Republicans, 27% think that jobs, the economy should be the top priority of state government, followed by education at 20% and health care at 18%. And among those Tennesseans who self-identified as Democrats, 33% believe that education should be the top priority of the state government, followed by health care at 22% and jobs and the economy at 18%. Our next question will come from Michael Anastasi and will also be for all of the candidates tonight. Michael?
Tennessee has made significant gains in K-12 education over the past 8 years, becoming the fastest improving state in the nation. What policy changes do you think are most responsible for the improvement, and what would you do to accelerate the gains during your time in office?
Thank you, Michael. Ms. Harwell.
Absolutely. We have set very high standards, and our teachers and our students are living up to those high standards. That has been the most critical thing that we have done. You know, when I first got involved in the political process, we were the 48th state in the nation when it came to education. Now we're in the 30th percentile. And when I'm your governor, my goal will be to be the top 10. We have set some very high standards in place. We're living up to those high standards, and we can never, ever relent from that. Now, I will tell you, we don't have our accountability system completely in place the way it should be. And as a legislator, we took steps to step back from that a little bit. But I will tell you that without a doubt, I will be committed to that. And we have made tremendous improvements in math and science. My goal would be to be known as the governor that believed in reading. And that will be my next goal.
Thank you, Ms. Harwell. Mr. Dean.
I think the really positive things that have been done under both Governor Bredesen and Governor Haslam have been to set standards and to strive for excellence, and then to make education a budgetary priority. Where we go from here is I think we need to continue to make education the top budgetary priority, and in fact actually increase funding. I think we need to look at disparities in funding around the state. There are rural areas, there are other urban areas that are struggling, and we need to open that up and find fairer ways to distribute money to make sure everybody gets a good education. We need to pay teachers a fair wage so that they'll stay as teachers. Teachers are everything in the classroom. We want to keep the best. We need to do more with pre-K, expand that statewide, and build on after-school programming.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Mr. Lee.
I serve as the chairman of the YMCA Middle Tennessee, and there's a program called YCAP that serves at-risk inner-city youth. And I met a young man in that program and got involved in his life, and he was failing every class in his poor-performing school. I moved him to a charter school where he had a completely different trajectory to his educational outcome. For 5 years, I've been meeting with that young man once a week, every week. Education profoundly impacts the life of a child, and a mediocre education in a negative way. That developed a passion in me that believes that not only did his education improve because of a choice that he had, but we support the teachers in a profound way. And the one thing that I'm most concerned about is our lack of vocational and technical education, which I've lived my entire life, and would be interested to talk about that going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Mr. Boyd.
So I agree with the other candidates that having high expectations and high accountability is something that we contribute a lot of our success to, and is something we need to continue. Also, we've been making major strides in increasing compensation for our teachers. We need to continue to do that. Under my watch, we'll do both of those two things. Going forward, two big areas that I want to focus on. One is providing more holistic programming for some of our young children. If you come to school hungry, bad eyesight, bad dental care, beaten, you go home in a very dangerous environment, it's going to be hard to be successful. In Knoxville, Jenny and I started a community school which provides an extra 3.5 hours worth of programming. That provides a hot dinner, provides programming for the parents. That's something that I want to be able to expand across the state. And there's some other things, but I'm out of time.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd. Mr. Fitch.
Thanks. I'm proud of what we've done and how far we've come. I've been a part of that in the legislature. I think we stubbed our toe a couple of times. One on early evaluation of teachers early in this particular administration's tenure, and then testing. And we've gotten some of those figured out, but not quite all. But I think our advances have come in early childhood education, and I think that's something that we all know now is very important, especially reading, and I would move that up as well. I would also say that a secondary emphasis or a post-secondary emphasis is some kind of post-secondary training is something we're moving toward, and it needs to continue. And then support for our teachers, not only how we treat them, but how we pay them. And then support for our teachers, our students, and remember that they're why this all happened.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzhugh. Our next question will be for Mr. Dean, Mr. Boyd, and Ms. Harwell, and will come from Darrell Cummings. Darrell?
Staying on K-12 education, let's discuss testing. Over the past several years, Tennessee has had issues as the state moves to implement online testing. But we've also led the nation in using our testing data to ensure accountability. How do you feel about TVOS and our current accountability system? And is there anything you would change if you were the governor?
Thank you, Darrell. Mr. Dean.
Well, I'm a big believer that you have to have accountability, and I think that same opinion is shared by teachers and educators all over the state. People want to have measurements. People want to know how we're doing. I think we're in a situation now where we have to restore credibility to the testing program because of the problems that we've had in the last several years with testing. You have parents who aren't sure that the results necessarily reflect their students' achievement or lack of achievement. And you also have results that come too late to actually have a positive effect in terms of improving teaching or addressing particular needs of students. So concentrating on getting that done and doing it right, doing the computer-based testing, but getting it done in a timely way and a credible way would be a high priority.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Mr. Boyd.
Well, first off, I have to recognize that our online testing and delivery system failed us this year, and everybody recognizes that. But the thing that I want to make sure that we don't give up on is our accountability and setting high expectations. You know, in sports, if your scoreboard breaks, nobody says, well, let's just stop keeping score. You fix the scoreboard, and that's the situation that we have here. We got to continue to keep score. It's up to us to make sure that politics don't get in the way of our children continuing to have high expectations. This online testing failure that we had, I think the people that we need to go to get the most insight from are our teachers, our principals, and our superintendents. So first off, we would organize a listening, learning tour, and then create some action plans to fix it. As a company, we've had a lot of IT issues in the past, but with the right emphasis, we can fix this.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd. Ms. Harwell.
Well, thank you so much. And I was a teacher for many, many years, and I meet many of my students from time to time, and they'll come up to me and they'll say, I remember when you gave the lecture about this, or I remember that class project about this, but I never had a student come up to me and say, I remember the test you gave me. But you know what? Testing is a necessary evil that exists within our education system. We have to have our education system accountable because it consumes a huge part of our state's budget. And when I talk to teachers, here's what they want. They want it to be credible, they want it to be fair, and they want it to be useful. And we haven't lived up to that, but we are trying. And this past legislative session, one of the last days of the session, we decided that we are not going to use the test scores accountable this year. So students and teachers and schools will not be held accountable because we didn't get the testing right. But I think we can do it.
Thank you, Ms. Harwell. Our next question comes from Laura Woods and will be for Mr. Lee, Mr. Boyd, and Mr. Fitzhugh. Laura?
Let's talk about school choice in K-12 education. Expanding school choice for families has been a hot topic in our state during the current governor's term. According to the Vanderbilt poll, 21% of Tennesseans support charter schools, 29% have mixed feelings, and 15% oppose. As for vouchers, 29% of Tennesseans support them, 23% have mixed feelings, and 16% oppose. Do you support or oppose school vouchers in charter schools? Why? And what policies would you propose as governor to address this issue?
Thank you, Laura. Mr. Lee.
So I referenced a young man that I worked with in the inner city, moved him from a traditional public school to a public charter school. His educational outcome was transformed. My own children were homeschooled, public schooled, private schooled, and I have experience with this charter school. I don't think it is so important what kind of school it is, but that the quality of education that our children receive is the highest that we can possibly give them. And when parents have choices about their education, not only is their child's education improved, but the system is improved. People say, I'm afraid of potentially doing charters or vouchers because of what it might do to the other schools. You know what I'm afraid of? I'm afraid of doing the very same thing we've been doing for the past 20 years and getting the results that we have today, which is the bottom half of states in America.
Mr. Boyd.
Yeah, so my wife and I both went to public schools. One of my sons went to a public school. One son went to a private school. My big brother, or little brother, and big brother's big sisters goes to a magnet school. I agree with Mr. Lee that quality schools can be in any of those types of different delivery methods. But as a business person, I believe in choice in the free market, and I believe that competition is a good thing. However, I also believe in the local government's control. I don't believe that national should be dictating policies for our local community. So as governor, I want to put all the tools in the toolbox. We will provide programming and support for charters and vouchers and the different programs that local communities can want to choose. But in the end, it will be up to the local community to choose which tool out of the toolbox that they want to use.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd. Mr. Fitzhugh.
Thank you. I'm unabashedly a supporter of public schools and have been my whole life. Went through public schools, as all my family, including my grandchildren that are old enough to go to school. So I think vouchers and charters are not good for public schools. I have been against vouchers for the last 5 years and pleased to have led the charge to keep vouchers out of public schools in Tennessee, because with a finite pot of money, we don't have the luxury to take some of that money and give it to private interests, because I think it both brings the voucher school down and the public school down. Charters are a bit different, And I think as long as we give our public schools the ability to do the same things that charters do, then that may be okay. However, the performance of charters, the way I've looked at it, has not been sufficient enough for us to continue to make that a priority.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzhugh. Our next question will come from Michael Anastasi. Will be for all of our candidates tonight. Michael.
According to the Vanderbilt poll, 54% of Tennesseans think that state government does more to help people living in and around large cities, while only 34% think it is equally split among large cities and rural areas and small towns. Do you think this is true? And should the state be doing more to help rural areas? And if so, what would you do as governor?
Thank you, Michael. Mr. Boyd.
So as Commissioner of Economic and Community Development, I traveled to all 95 counties, and I would agree with the premise that our rural communities are getting left behind. In fact, in the state of Tennessee, when I started, we had 21 distressed counties, meaning we had 21 counties in the bottom 10% in the entire United States in poverty and income and unemployment. We created something called the Rural Task Force. We appointed the first Assistant Commissioner of Rural Development in rural communities. During that 2-year period, our new job placements went from 28% in our rural communities to 45%. So we're putting in focus on bringing more jobs there. We also started something called the Governor's Rural Task Force. And with the efforts of that team, 120 people across the state focusing on our rural communities, we were able to reduce the distressed counties from 21 to 15. We've got a lot of work left to do. As governor, it will be 0 by the year 2025.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd. Mr. Fitzhugh.
Thank you. I'm a rural guy, born, raised, and lived there, except for the last 24 years I've spent about half my time here in Nashville, so I get a pretty good feeling about rural and urban. And we do need some assistance in the rural areas. Our motto of our campaign is, we all do better when we all do better. If we can do better in the rural areas in the east, west, and middle parts of our state, the whole state will do better. And sometimes that means giving some breaks because of the lower tax base that rural areas have. We have the ability, we just need to do what people want in rural areas to make them a place where they want to come back and live. I say we need to ask our students, why are they leaving and what will it take to bring them back? And I think we need to put an emphasis on that because Tennessee is a great state and we're going to have a lot of people that want to come here and we need to make all areas of it as best we can.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzhugh. Ms. Harwell.
Well, thank you so much. And I will tell you that Middle Tennessee is booming right now. And so I will tell you as governor, I would never offer an incentive package to someone to come and locate here in Middle Tennessee. We need to offer those packages to those folks who are willing to go to our rural areas. And you know, there is a beauty of living in a rural part of Tennessee. And there are people that would never want to live in an urban area. They don't like the traffic, they don't like the cost of living or the cost of real estate. There is a beauty in living in rural West Tennessee. All they need is an opportunity for jobs to be there. And that's why this past legislative session, we lowered the F&E tax for manufacturers so we can recruit more manufacturers here to the state of Tennessee.
Thank you, Ms. Harwell. Mr. Dean.
Well, I certainly understand the feelings of people in rural Tennessee or small town Tennessee who sometimes feel forgotten. I mean, a good example would be Fall Creek Falls State Park, which is very rural Tennessee, and that was allowed to get into terrible condition. Now they have to tear down a building, creating upheavals there financially. I think we need to be doing more in rural Tennessee, and particularly in terms of directing economic development there. You know, for West Tennessee alone, 15 out of 21 counties are losing population. I've always believed that you build community by investing. You invest not only in economic development, which I'd make a priority in rural and small town Tennessees, but you also invest in schools. And that's why I want to address disparities in school funding. And you have to invest in health care. When you don't have a hospital, economic development is really hard.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Mr. Lee.
Yeah, I grew up and live on still today a 5th generation cattle farm. I grew up in rural Tennessee. I understand how critically important it is to the future of this state. And yet we have 45 counties in this state that are either at risk or designated as distressed. That should not be. We are at risk of losing a way of life in rural Tennessee. And if the next governor doesn't do something decisive about it, we will lose that way of life, and it matters to every Tennessean what happens in rural Tennessee. That's why last year I rolled out a roadmap for rural Tennessee that includes 4 things that I would do as governor to preserve this way of life, and not only to preserve it, but to allow it to flourish.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Our next question will come from Darrell Cobbins and will be for Mr. Fitzhugh, Ms. Harwell, and Mr. Lee. Darrell?
In recent years, rural access to hospitals has been severely curtailed as a result of hospital closures. Regardless of the cause, the closures limit access to quality health care in our rural communities. Do you agree this is a major issue, and what concrete steps would you take as governor to help ensure Tennesseans living in rural areas have access to quality health care in a local hospital?
Thank you, Darrell. Mr. Fitzhugh.
Thank you. My first answer about the top three things, the first one was healthcare, and much of that has to do with the closure of rural hospitals. The biggest moral failure that our legislature has had in the 24 years I've been there, in my opinion, is the failure to expand Medicaid. If we had expanded Medicaid, I am convinced those hospitals, we have more than per capita than any other state in the country, would not have closed. It is the most important thing that we can do. The political reasons are out of the way now. The first thing I will do as governor is, if I have to, call a special session to have it done. It could reopen those hospitals. It will certainly keep more of those from closing.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzhugh. Ms. Harwell.
Well, thank you so much. I do have to you have to understand there's kind of a misconception that if we had expanded Medicaid, that our rural hospitals would still be in existence. The bottom line is, those states that did not, that went ahead and expanded Medicaid, also have hospitals closing. Kentucky, Arkansas are two very good examples. The bottom line is this: do we need to do something? Absolutely we do. And I set up a three-star task force that looked at a way to expand coverage. And I think there's a new day here in Tennessee. And I believe, I don't agree with everything he wants to do, but I will tell you this about President Trump. I think he understands that domestic issues belong at the state level, where they can be more efficiently and effectively run. And I believe we have an opportunity to go to this administration and say, let us reform not only expansion, but also our current TennCare program.
Thank you,
And that's what I would do.
Mr. Lee.
I think there's a reason that rural hospitals are failing, and it's because we have a system that is fundamentally flawed. We have 3 Ps: payers, providers, and patients. At all 3 of those points, there is virtually no incentive to lower cost. And when you have a system that doesn't lower cost, then you have an unsustainable system. And it's irresponsible for us to sit back and let rural hospitals fail without addressing the real challenges of this system. And particularly if our president does give us block grants to allow us to construct a system that will lower cost, and then in rural communities will change the way that system looks. Alternative choices for patients to provide better access in those. Until we change fundamentally the system, we will not solve the problems in rural Tennessee hospitals.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. You guys are doing great. Everybody take a breath. As part of our forum tonight, we've added a few questions to help our audience to get to know you as candidates and individuals. These are questions designed to have an answer that's a single word or maybe just a single phrase. Our first rapid-fire question is, so far, what has been your most memorable moment on the campaign trail? Mr. Fitzhugh.
Well, I've gotten to know Interstate 40 a lot better than I thought I had. It's a wonderful highway. I just go and turn left and right. But I must say, my most memorable moment is getting to know these folks. I don't agree. I've already disagreed with all but one of them right now, but I'll disagree with the other one in a little bit. But they're good folks. They're good folks, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Boyd.
That's hard to answer, but I'll just pick the first one that came to mind. So I ran across the state, 537.3 miles, and I met a young lady named Faith, who overcame spina bifida to run with me, and was very inspirational.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd. Mr. Dean.
Most surprising thing I saw was in Pulaski, Tennessee, when I was visiting there, and they brought me upstairs in an old building on the square where they had discovered an old opera house that had been built up above it and that had been there for a century. And the thought of redoing that and restoring it to its glory would be a great thing for Pulaski and the state of Tennessee, but it was fantastic to see it. A little bit dangerous because it was
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Mr. Lee.
I think the most inspiring thing on our campaign was a reference to the fact that Maria and I took an old RV to 95 counties in 95 days. Day 1 of our campaign, we decided to start in Van Buren County. That was our first stop. A rural, struggling county, because I wanted to be reminded that while Tennessee is a remarkable place, We have some real challenges, and there are people all across the state that need hope. And I'll never forget our very first campaign stop as the first day running for governor to go into Van Buren County.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Ms. Harwell.
Well, thank you so much. You know, it's been my honor to not only serve as the state Republican Party chairman, in which I traveled all 95 counties, but also as speaker for the last 8 years, in which I've been to all 95 counties. So this is not new to me, but I will tell you something that really motivated me. I was in Jackson, Tennessee, where I went to see, they were building a new facility for law enforcement training. And you know what? They used the workers from the local jail to provide the equipment and the personnel to build that. And I was so impressed when I left there. And here's the good thing. Those people were all in demand to be hired as soon as they left the prison system. That's a difference we can make when we try to think outside the box.
Thank you, Ms. Harwell. Our next question will be for all of our candidates tonight and comes from Laura Woods. Laura?
Tennessee is a very unhealthy state. We rank in the bottom 10 states in the nation for many health metrics, including obesity, diabetes, depression, and infant mortality. It has a negative economic impact in the billions of dollars each year. How big of a priority would this be for you as governor? And please tell us the tangible plans you would use to pursue to address our major health issues.
Thank you, Laura. Ms. Harwell.
Without a doubt, we need to offer people incentives to live healthier lifestyles. And we are doing that now with our state employees. We're saying to our state employees, if you will go online and you will participate in a wellness program, if you will stop smoking, if you will do certain things, you can get a lower premium. And that's the type of incentive we need to offer to people. You know, we have a misconception in our country that, you know, you're either going to be a marathon runner or you're a couch potato. The honest truth is most people are like me. They're never going to be a marathon runner, but you know what? They can walk every day. And they could choose carrot strips instead of French fries every now and then. So there are always ways we can incentivize people to live a healthier lifestyle.
Thank you, Ms. Harwell. Mr. Dean.
Well, when I was mayor, I was very concerned about this, and we had a series of initiatives that we worked on, you know, Walk 100 Miles with the mayor. We did our 5Ks and field days and things like that to use the bully pulpit to get people to understand the importance of preventative health care. I mean, the fact is that Tennessee is, if you look at these health matrices, including women's health in general, we rank in the bottom 10 in almost all of them. We are not a very healthy state. I think we need to encourage people to be more fit. We need to make sure that people have access to health care where they can get checkups and find out what their health condition is and take preventative action. And I think we need to think about building things such as greenways and parks so that a healthy choice is an easy choice and people have access to the outdoors and exercise everywhere, no matter what their income.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Mr. Lee.
I do think we have an impending crisis, a tsunami, really, of preventable health. In 1990, not one state in America had a 20% obesity rate. Today, not one state has less than that. We have to address this largely, 80% of the cost of healthcare is preventable and chronic, largely preventable and chronic. Now, I don't believe that government is the answer to problems. I am a guy who believes that the private sector and the nonprofit community are much more effective in solving the challenges of our state, particularly challenges like Healthy Tennessee. And I chaired the YMCA, who had enormous opportunity and incentives and initiatives around health. And that's the way that we will change health going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Mr. Boyd.
Well, the reason why I ran across the state of Tennessee was to promote a healthier Tennessee. And it's not just about running. We had Metro Drug Coalition run with me and to promote the fact that we needed to teach more drug education at elementary school. So a wide variety of influences, but the premise is correct. We're 6th in the country in obesity, number 8 in the country in smoking, number 1 in the country in teenage obesity. But that's not sustainable for a state that's also 42nd in the country in income. There are 2 places we can contact people. One is at the workplace. My company put together a wellness program 8 years ago. Last year, our claims went down 19%. It can be done with the right focus. And second, we can reach our students at their schools. At our community school, we have a community garden, teaching them to grow food and what healthy food means. There are ways we can do it. And as governor, it'll be a top priority of mine.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd. Mr. Fitzhugh.
I've always been an active guy, but we had a health forum earlier, and I had to admit that my physical activity has just really gone since I've been on this race, and my diet hasn't been very good either. So I made the commitment there. I actually think I said that I'd like to be a model when I get elected and see how I can do it. Because I think children would get a big kick out of it anyway. But the point is, we need to live better, we need to eat better, we need to exercise more, and as all of us have said, those are the things that will make an importance, and we have to have it. We have to have it a priority. In this year, we passed a bill, a physical education bill in school, and we passed another one earlier than that to make sure kids get out and exercise in many different ways. So we need to make it a priority in this state.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzhugh. Our next question will come from Michael Anastasi and will be from Mr. Dean, Mr. Lee, and Ms. Harwell. Michael?
According to the Vanderbilt poll, 76% of Tennesseans believe that opioid addiction is a state of emergency or a major problem, and almost half believe that drug companies and doctors who prescribe opioids share as much of the blame as the people who abuse opioids. Do you think the opioid issue is a state of emergency, major problem? Who is to blame? And what is your plan to address this issue?
Thank you, Michael. Mr. Dean?
Well, I think it definitely is a crisis here in Tennessee. The number of people who have died, the number of families that have been devastated by opioid epidemic is distressing. But I think we're making progress. I think the legislature passed some good legislation this year trying to get a handle on overprescription of drugs, and we need to monitor that carefully, and if we need to improve it, then we should improve it. I think one of the big gaps we have here in Tennessee is treatment. That is, again, partially related to Medicaid expansion. We have nowhere near the treatment that we need here. There's a place called Renewal House here in Nashville that works with young mothers and pregnant women, and they have a 50-person waiting list. I also saw a place in Jackson, Aspel, which also has a waiting list. We need to have more treatment available in our state.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Ms. Harwell?
Well, thank you so much. We did take some action this legislative session. I set up a task force, and the governor agreed with some of the recommendations we made. Number one, we limit the number of prescriptions for those that are opioid naive. That means people that have never received an opioid drug before. We've limited those to 5-day prescription, because literally in the 6th day, you can see a change in the brain. And we've taken scans of brains, and we know that's true. Number two, we have increased the number of TBI agents. We will have 5 in East Tennessee and 5 in West Tennessee to try to keep illegal drugs from coming into our state. And then finally, I will say we will never incarcerate our way out of this problem. That is not the answer. The answer is rehab. And we have put more money in drug courts where people are sentenced not to time in prison, but time in rehabilitation. I think those 3 things will go a long way in our state.
Thank you, Ms. Harwell. Our next question comes from Darrell Commons and will be for Mr. Lee, Mr. Boyd, and Mr. Fitzhugh. Darrell?
It seems that political polarization continues to grow across our country. However, according to the Vanderbilt poll, 76% of Tennesseans prefer for elected officials to work with members of the other political party, even if it means compromising on some of their values and priorities. Do you agree or disagree that working with the other party is important? Why? And where do you see opportunities to work with the other party?
Thank you, Darrell. Mr. Lee?
I think what you're talking about is leadership. The governor of this state is the head of the executive branch of government. That's why it's so important that as we consider this, we consider executive leadership going forward. I know in my own company, we oftentimes have to sit people around the table who have conflicting interests and competing interests. You do it in business with customers as well. We do it in all forms in the private sector and in the nonprofit community. Leadership and casting a vision and having people of all types come together and execute a strategy on that vision is what this job is all about.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Mr. Boyd?
I don't think it's about the R's or the D's, it's about the T's. My experience has been that if you're focused on the right things, the things that really matter, we can all come together. When I worked on the Tennessee Promise, remember that we worked for a year on that program. I couldn't tell you today who was a Republican and who was a Democrat, but in the end, 91 out of 99 representatives voted for it, 32 out of 33 state senators voted for it. In economic development, when we're working with local communities, mayors, local elected officials, it never came up what party we were in. It was about landing that job. And so important things, the parties didn't matter. And finally, working on the Rural Economic Opportunity Act to help our rural communities. I had a task force of 120 people all across the state. I couldn't tell you today which ones are Republicans or which ones are Democrats, but we got big things done by focusing on what's really important.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd. Mr. Fitzhugh.
Thanks. I think we have to cooperate with both sides. I've been in the legislature for 24 years. 10 years of that, I've been the minority leader. So I know what it's like to be in a minority. Sometimes I've been called a fierce partisan, but I can also count. So I can count votes, and I know how much we've had, and we have. So it's one of the reasons I think I'll make a pretty good governor, because I know the legislature. I've been a part of it. I see some justices in the audience. I'm a lawyer. I know the judicial branch, and I know what an executive is supposed to do. And I know how to compromise on things that are not core issues. So we can get things done. I'm confident of it in my administration.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzhugh. Our next question will be for all of our candidates tonight. It comes from Laura Woods. Laura?
It's estimated that approximately 400,000 Tennesseans don't have health insurance. Tennessee is one of 18 states that has chosen not to expand its Medicaid program, which would allow more low-income, uninsured adults to have health insurance. According to the Vanderbilt poll, 66% of Tennesseans think we should expand our Medicaid program, known as TennCare. Do you support or oppose Medicaid expansion in Tennessee? And if you oppose, what would be your plan to help provide coverage for low-income Tennesseans who are uninsured?
Thank you, Laura. Mr. Boyd.
So I think it's a false opportunity to expand Medicaid, because that opportunity is still not available to us. The current administration isn't putting that on offer. What they are putting on offer is a block grant. And as governor, the first thing that I will do is go back to Washington, D.C. and argue for a block grant. And if we can do that, the great part about that is we can argue and negotiate for more funds than we have now, hopefully as much as we would have gotten in an expansion anyway. The best part is Tennesseans get to set the rules for Tennesseans. And I'm confident if Tennesseans set our own rules, we can do a better job than D.C. can.
Thank you, Mr. Boyd. Mr. Fitzhugh.
This governor has done that. Governor Haslam has put us in place a reverse block grant. He has asked the federal government to do certain things for which the federal government will give us a block grant back. I call it a reverse block grant. It is exactly what everybody in the country wants. They want to do that. I just cannot understand, and I've been fighting this thing for years, and there is no political, no monetary reason, there is no reason why we should not expand Medicaid. Nobody on this panel can tell me that there is.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzhugh. Ms. Harwell.
Well, again, I set up a task force, and the three-star task force came with what I thought was a very legitimate proposal to take to the federal government. I think we have a new administration. I think we can go to them and say, not only do we want to cover more people, especially in behavioral health issues, which is what the three-star did, but we want to make sure that we have triggers in place that we never expand our program to the point that it's consuming more than 38% of our budget, which it is right now. And you may recall that we did expand. We had expanded Medicaid up until 2005 in this state, and that's when Governor Phil Bredesen became the governor, and he said, we're going to have to cut it back because it is consuming too much of our budget. So we have to be very, very careful. I know it sounds good to cover everyone. The bottom line is it consumes a huge part of our budget.
Thank you, Ms. Harwell. Mr. Dean.
Well, I'm definitely in favor of Medicaid expansion, and I think what we can do at this point, looking back to that decision, we can see what the results were. I mean, our state has lost over $4 billion, and that's a billion with a B. And that's money that could have been spent to give people with low incomes, people with pre-existing conditions, people with disabilities access to health care. And we said no to that. And as a result of that, there are people in our state, hundreds of thousands of people, who do not have health care. And they are facing serious medical consequences because of that. We've already touched upon the economic results of this is that we're leading the country in per capita closures of hospitals with 10, and it's wreaking economic havoc on small towns and rural areas.
Thank you, Mr. Dean. Mr. Lee.
I think one of the main and most important jobs of a governor is to make certain that a state is fiscally solvent and that we are in a good financial condition. Healthcare costs are escalating so rapidly. My company's health insurance premiums went up 29% 2 years ago, 19% last year. That is unsustainable cost growth. And if we expand Medicaid under a system that we